What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with Dana White reveals huge fights for UFC Saudi Arabia. The UFC will be back in Saudi Arabia for a February 1st card in the spring, and the promotion has booked two must-see fights for striking enthusiasts. Recently, UFC CEO Dana White announced that former middleweight champion Israel Adesanya will battle fellow contender Nassourdine Imavov at the upcoming card. In addition, rising middleweight star Shara Magomedov will throw down with Michael Venom Page. And before we continue, make sure to leave a like on the video to help support the channel.
What's up, everybody? We are going back to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia on February 1st, live from the ANB Arena. In the main event, former middleweight champion Israel Adesanya will face top 5 ranked Nassourdine Imavov. This will be the first time Israel Adesanya has been in a non-title fight since 2019. Adesanya is one of the most exciting and talented strikers to ever compete in the UFC. Out of 24 wins, 16 have come by knockout. He holds the UFC middleweight record for most knockdowns, second title fight wins, and second longest win streak. He holds wins over Alex Pereira, Anderson Silva, Robert Whittaker, and the list just goes on and on. Nassourdine Imavov is one of the brightest young contenders in the division. He's currently on a 3-fight win streak, beating all ranked opponents, and he has a similar style to Israel. He loves to strike. In the co-main event, undefeated Shara Bullet Magomedov faces Michael Venom Page. Shara, the Pirate, is coming off an incredible double spinning back fist win over Armen Petrosyan, which broke him into the rankings after just 4 fights in the UFC. 12 of his 15 fights have come by knockout, and he's won a performance bonus in his last 3 fights. Every time this guy fights, you know it will be action-packed. MVP is one of the most entertaining fighters to ever come out of the UK, with an unorthodox karate style that is difficult for anybody to prepare for. He's incredibly explosive and has the ability to finish fights quickly and violently. This will be a very fun fight. We're returning to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia live on February 1st. I will see you there.
It's an interesting and somewhat historic booking for Adesanya, as this will mark the first time since 2019 he'll be competing in a non-title fight. Not too many fighters can actually say that. It'll also be the first time the last stylebender has competed since he was submitted by current middleweight king Dricus du Plessis this past August. For Imavov, this is a massive opportunity, and it's been awarded to him on account of a 4-fight undefeated streak. The last man to defeat Imavov was Sean Strickland in 2023. Anytime Adesanya fights, kickboxing fans are sure to have their interest peak, but with the Magomedov-Page fight, that interest should be blasting through the roof. Shara Bullet will be looking to build on his jaw-dropping knockout of Armen Petrosyan in October. Page, meanwhile, is looking to get back on track after dropping a decision to Ian Gary in June. The vaunted striker has not really been able to buzz fans since he arrived in the UFC earlier this year. It'll be interesting to see how he does moving up to face one of the middleweight division's rising commodities. Who do you have winning these fights? And if Adesanya and Magomedov win, could we see these two facing off in the octagon to promote a future battle? After Shara Bullet put away Petrosyan in October, the Dagestani fighter drove hard for a showdown with Izzy. What's next for Joaquin Buckley after UFC Tampa win? Joaquin Buckley took a massive step at UFC Tampa into title contention by closing the book on Colby Covington's chapter as a welterweight title contender. From the get-go, Buckley threatened with booming punches, and not too long into the fight, he cut Chaos badly above the right eye. Covington was clearly bothered by the cut, and as the fight wore on, it got worse and worse. Covington desperately hunted for a takedown, and while he was able to score a couple, the controversial fighter was unable to do anything with the top position. Buckley, meanwhile, continued to punish Covington with shots as the fight continued, and finally, in round 3, with Colby's face a mask of blood, the bout was called off by the cage-side doctor. Dana White wasn't too happy with the stoppage during the post-fighter interview.
Yeah, I was curious to see how it would go if it went 5 rounds, if it went later in the rounds. No doubt that was a bad cut, but that fight doesn't get stopped in Vegas. That fight keeps going in Vegas. But I also feel like Colby wasn't too pissed that that fight got stopped by the cut.
So what's next for Buckley? That's a good question. Heading into the card, the powerful welterweight was ranked number 9, and Covington was ranked number 6. So given that, and because Buckley has won 6 straight now, a battle with a top 5 ranked welterweight is almost certainly next. Could we see Buckley fight Sean Brady, Jack Della Maddalena, or even Kamaru Usman next? Or could the UFC tap him to fight Leon Edwards at the UFC's next card in London on March 22nd? For Covington, it certainly seems like his run as a title contender has finally come to an end. Chaos has been a fixture at the top of the welterweight division for several years, but given that he's now 36 and has lost 4 of his last 6 fights, Covington's claims that he's the best fighter on the planet have never sounded more hollow. Dustin Poirier teases next UFC fight. For months now, the MMA world has been waiting to hear who Dustin Poirier will fight next and what will likely be the final chapter of his storied career. Well, while Poirier stopped short of announcing his next opponent, it looks like something is in the works. Following Poirier's submission loss to the lightweight king Islam Makhachev this past June, the Diamond reported he may not return to the cage, but eventually, as many pundits and fans predicted, Poirier announced that he wants to throw hands one more time. More recently, the lightweight contender reported via social media that he'll have big news soon in terms of his next matchup. Got something planned for you. Hold on, I'm coming. There will be blood. See you soon. And when one fan accused Poirier of ducking fellow contender Rafael Fiziev, the Diamond responded with this: ha ha ha. Poirier also reiterated that the fight will be the final bout of his memorable career. The last dance, I promise ya. So the question remains, who could the UFC be looking at for Poirier's next and final fight? Many have wondered if the UFC will book a much discussed rubber match between Poirier and Gaethje, since both men are fan favorites and each man holds a stoppage win over the other. Poirier also expressed an interest in fighting surging contender Dan Hooker, a fight that would also have must-see written all over it. There's also been talk about whether Poirier and Nate Diaz could finally fight after plans for a scrap in 2018 fell through. And of course, due to Poirier's well-documented rivalry with Conor McGregor, some fans are still calling for the two to run it back one more time. But given McGregor is expected to fight Michael Chandler next, if the controversial star actually ever fights again, another fight with Poirier seems very unlikely. But who do you want to see Poirier fight in what looks like will be his final octagon dance? Dana White talked about Dustin Poirier's last fight during the post-fight press conference after UFC Tampa. Here's what Dana had to say.
No, we're in the middle of talks for him with something that he wants to do for the end of his career.
UFC updates. Dana White isn't the only person who's been reporting new matchups that have been added to the UFC's Q1 schedule. Recently, Judge Zeno Rosenstruik reportedly told James Lynch that he's heard fellow heavyweight contender Curtis Blaydes is going to battle surging heavyweight Rizvan Kuniev next. The initial post said that the fight is also set for the UFC's February 1st card in Saudi Arabia, but Lynch followed up and clarified that Rosenstruik only reported the fight was going down sometime in February. SureDog.com has the fight listed for taking place February 22nd in Seattle. All that aside, it's a massive opportunity for Kuniev. Currently, the Russian fighter isn't ranked in the top 15 of the UFC's heavyweight rankings, because he hasn't even competed in an official UFC bout yet. He secured a UFC deal in August via stoppage win on Dana White's Contender Series. Blaydes, meanwhile, is sitting in the number 5 spot, following his quick stoppage loss to interim champion Tom Aspinall in July. The powerful wrestler is 3-2 in his last 5 fights. A couple of new matchups are being reported for the UFC's February 15th card in Las Vegas. Marcel Dorff recently posted that NTR Day MMA is reporting Rafael Estevam will battle Jesus Aguilar in a flyweight contest. Estevam is looking to build on a decision victory over Charles Johnson, which moved his record to a perfect 12-0. Aguilar, meanwhile, submitted Stuart Nickel in his last outing and has won 3 fights straight. In addition, Dorff is reporting that heavyweights Valter Walker and Don'Tale Mayes will throw hands at the UFC Vegas 102 card. Walker returned to the win column this past August by catching Junior Tafa with an opening round heel hook. Prior to that, he dropped a decision to Lukas Brzezinski. Mayes is looking to get back on track after losing by decision to Shamil Gaziev that same month. It's a key fight for Mayes, as he's gone 2-3 in his last 5 fights. Brendan Allen is not scheduled to fight until February 22nd, when he locks horns with Anthony Hernandez. And that's likely a good thing, given what the middleweight's battling right now. Recently, Allen shared out via social media that he's dealing with a nasty staph infection. Hopefully, his treatment protocol deals with it quickly and thoroughly. Dana White reacted to the new Fight League and competitor GFL, stating that he doesn't know who they are and welcomes them. Here's what Dana had to say.
I actually don't know anything about it. I say this all the time. I welcome everybody. Listen, there's no barrier to entry to get into this sport. And, I hear a lot of people saying that we don't do this right, we don't do that right. Come on in, everybody. Dive in.
MMA community roasts Conor McGregor for training footage. Recently, some new footage of Conor McGregor rolling and submitting a training partner made the rounds, and plenty of folks in the MMA world were far from impressed with what they saw. As 2025 comes to a close, there's no real indication of when we'll see the controversial star back in the cage. The former UFC champ continues to make headlines for incidents and allegations out of the cage, but McGregor has repeatedly insisted he plans to fight again. Well, McGregor is clearly doing some training, as this video shows. But as noted, plenty of fans were quick to pile on the Irish star on account of the video, citing concerns about how McGregor looked, in light of what his rolling partner was doing. Is he rolling with a white belt? That's how I felt in the octagon, and I had to tap myself out 3 times. Bro, after trying to just get the armbar. Conor is done forever. He's a supposed black belt rolling with a guy that doesn't know how to shrimp to the side and not stay flat on his back. He wouldn't even win, let alone submit Crum Gracie at this point. Wow, great skills against a twink full-time plumber. Now, McGregor boosters might argue that we don't know if this footage was possibly shot after he had more intensive rolls with high-level grapplers, or if he was just taking it easy. But given that McGregor has not fought since 2021, and what's transpired in his life since, it's not the first time people questioned if his days as a top-tier fighter are behind him. Tom Aspinall reveals Jon Jones' fight is happening. Since Jon Jones put away Stipe Miocic at UFC 309 last month, the heavyweight champ has not publicly committed to fighting Tom Aspinall, but recently the interim champ reported he was told by Dana White the all-star bout is going to happen. If you follow our channel, you know that for months now, the MMA world has been calling for Jones and Aspinall to fight. Prior to UFC 309, however, Bones repeatedly scoffed at the idea that he needs to face the rising star, prompting many to claim that Jones is ducking Aspinall. Well, following UFC 309, Jones finally acknowledged a scrap with Aspinall could happen if the UFC hands over a massive check. So during a recent appearance on Piers Morgan, Aspinall reported that despite all that, White told him the fight will happen.
That took place, that interview, right after the Jones fight, the same night. And actually right after that press conference, I had a meeting with Dana. So I hadn't seen any of this stuff that he'd said. So in all honesty, I was expecting him to come and we maybe negotiate a little bit. And he literally walked into the room and said, "It's happening." And I said, "Well, he's gonna want loads of money." And he said, "I know, but it's happening."
Dana White during the post-fight press conference guaranteed that Jones versus Aspinall will happen. Tom Aspinall shared this clip on his Instagram story.
But other than that, Jon Jones behind the scene is not a guy that turns down fights.
Would you guarantee 100% we see that fight?
Yeah, I'll say 100%. And I think it's probably the biggest fight in heavyweight history, and it's a massive fight in the history of the company too.
Obviously, if you're one of the gazillion people who want to see Jones and Aspinall scrap, this is welcome news. But what do you think? Will we see Jones and Aspinall get after it in 2025? Nate Diaz fires back at Jake Paul. Jake Paul continues to claim that he's willing to battle Nate Diaz in an MMA fight, but it looks like the Stockton star has no intention of fighting Paul under the PFL banner. Ever since Paul and Diaz threw hands in a boxing match back in August 2023, the YouTube influencer has said he's willing to fight Diaz under MMA rules. Paul is supposed to be transitioning into MMA fights as part of his contract with the PFL. During a recent press conference, Paul even claimed that Diaz is afraid to meet him in the cage. So much so, according to Paul, the legend's willing to miss out on a massive payday.
We want to, but our opponents don't actually really want to at that. So it's funny that Nate Diaz is like actually scared to fight me in MMA. Actually, the biggest payday of his life would be me and him in MMA. I'm ready.
Not surprisingly, it wasn't too long before Diaz was firing back at Paul. The star responded to Paul's comments with this social media post. "Sign the contract, Scary, and not in 12 months from now, and in an organization." Now, Diaz didn't explicitly mention the PFL, but it seems pretty clear that's the organization he was referring to. If Diaz is not willing to make a move to the PFL, however, it seems pretty unlikely that we'll see these two battle in an MMA contest. Colby Covington gets exposed by the MMA community after it was shown that Colby actually cut his shirt on the top and bottom prior to ripping it during his walkout. In the screenshot, you can clearly see the cut lines. Here's what the community had to say. Colby had his shirt cut already before he ripped it. Colby cut his shirt before ripping it in half. Please cut this idiot. Another example of how corny this dude is. Dude's whole persona is an act. He got manhandled his last few fights. It's ridiculous. Saddest MMA fighter of all time. Waste of space. Don't like him in the least bit. He's such a wannabe pick-me type of guy. He's with Choke Hogan, so obviously he's gonna do cringe. Least he bled for it. Colby Covington pre-snipped his shirt at the top and bottom so he could tear it off during the walkout.